Imagine being 90 years old and still reading the morning paper without squinting. No glasses, no struggle, just clarity. In Okinawa, that's not a miracle, that's just Tuesday. When an ophthalmologist first started examining the eyes of elderly people on that small Japanese island, he expected to find the usual signs of aging. What he found instead stopped him cold. Many of these men and women, in their 80s, 90s, even past 100, had retinas that looked healthier than patients he was treating back home who were decades younger. He spent years trying to figure out why. This is a story about a doctor who couldn't let go of a question. He had built his career around eyes, spent every day looking through lenses at the slow deterioration that most people assumed was just part of getting older. Inflammation, poor circulation, retinal tissue that looked under the scope like it had been quietly rusting from the inside. Every week, the same patterns, the same diagnoses, the same resigned conversations with patients who thought there was nothing to be done. And then one study crossed his desk that changed everything. It referenced the vision health of elderly populations in Okinawa, an island in southern Japan long known for extraordinary longevity. The data was strange enough that he read it twice. Then he booked a flight. He arrived with a full kit, a portable ophthalmoscope, an OCT device, optical coherence tomography, essentially a detailed scan of the eye's internal structure, and a quiet determination to find the catch, because numbers like those in the study didn't happen without an explanation. On his first day, he was introduced to a woman named Hatsue. She was 102 years old. When he walked into her home, she was sitting by an open window in the late afternoon light, natural light falling softly across her lap. And she was sewing, threading a needle. No glasses, no magnifying lens, just her eyes and her hands moving with a steadiness that made him stop in the doorway. He stood there longer than he should have, doing the clinical math in his head. The level of visual acuity required for that kind of close detail work, at that age, in that light, it didn't add up. He introduced himself, asked if he could examine her eyes, and she agreed as casually as if he'd asked for directions. He opened the retinal image on his display and looked for drusen first. That's the term for the tiny yellowish deposits that accumulate beneath the macula over time. The biological equivalent of sediment building up in a pipe. In virtually every patient over 70 he examined back home, drusen were present. It was almost a given. In Hatsue's retina, there were none. Then he measured her macular pigment optical density, the number that tells you how much natural protection the macula still has. In his older American and European patients, he typically saw readings around 0. 4. Hatsue's was 0, 78. That was the reading of a 40-year-old eye. He sat with that number for a long moment before moving on. Over the following days, he examined 11 more people. 8 of them were over 85. The pattern held across every single one: clean retinas, high macular pigment, capillary health in the eye that he associated with people half their age. The genetic explanation was the first thing he considered, and the first thing he ruled out. The children and grandchildren of these same people who had moved to the mainland, to the United States, to Australia, and adopted a Western lifestyle, didn't have these numbers. Their eyes aged on the same timeline as everyone else's, so the DNA wasn't doing it. Something in the way these people lived was. To understand what he eventually discovered, you need to know one thing about your own eyes that most people have never been told. The retina is the most oxygen-hungry tissue in the entire human body. Pound for pound, it burns more oxygen than your heart does during exercise. That's remarkable, and it's a problem, because high oxygen consumption means high production of free radicals, the same oxidative molecules that cause iron to rust and cells to break down. Think of your retina like the sensor inside a high-resolution camera that's been running non-stop for decades and has never once been cleaned. Over time, the build-up affects the image. Details soften, contrast fades, the picture gets harder to read. Inside the macula, there's a layer of protective compounds, lutein and zeaxanthin, that researchers call the macular pigment. Think of it as a built-in UV filter, a biological lens coating that absorbs the most damaging wavelengths of light before they can burn through the photoreceptor cells underneath. Here's the part that matters. Your body cannot manufacture this pigment on its own. Every molecule of it has to come from food. When that filter runs thin, because the diet doesn't supply what the eye needs, because circulation in the retinal capillaries has slowed down, because chronic inflammation is quietly doing its damage, the retina starts to degrade from the inside, slowly, without any noticeable symptoms, often for years before a person notices anything is wrong. Quick pause before we go further. Look at something across the room. Now bring your finger close to your face and focus on it. Now back to the far point. Did the focus shift smoothly? Or was there a slight delay, a hesitation, like an old camera lens hunting for the right setting? That lag in accommodation starts quietly after 45. It accelerates after 60. It's not a normal part of aging in the sense that it's inevitable. It's common. But common and inevitable are very different things, and the gap between the two was sitting right there on the plates of the people in Okinawa. The doctor eventually identified 3 consistent pillars in the diet of every person he examined on that island. 3 categories of food that appeared to work together to maintain the kind of ocular health that his Western patients simply weren't getting. The first he came to call the purple shield. Okinawa has a staple food that most Westerners have never encountered, a deep purple sweet potato called beni imo. It's not a side dish there. It's the foundation of the meal, the base carbohydrate, the way white rice or white bread is in much of the rest of the world. What makes it remarkable for eye health isn't the starch, it's the pigment. Anthocyanins, the same class of flavonoids that give blueberries, blackberries, and red grapes their deep color, have a specific and powerful effect on the microvasculature of the retina. And this is the detail that changes the picture entirely. The capillaries inside the retina are the thinnest blood vessels in the human body. We're talking about 5 to 10 micrometers in diameter, narrower than a single strand of hair. When those capillaries lose elasticity, through inflammation, through glycation, through years of nutritional neglect, blood flow drops, the macula starts to starve, and the aging of the eye accelerates in ways that no eye drop can reverse. Anthocyanins work on that problem from 3 directions at once. They increase the flexibility of capillary walls, they reduce the leakage of fluid into retinal tissue, and they act as direct antioxidants inside the photoreceptor cells themselves. You don't need to source Okinawan sweet potatoes. Blueberries, blackberries, dark cherries, purple grapes, all of them carry the same compounds. The threshold that research points to is around 3.5 ounces a day, every day, not as a supplement, as actual food. The second pillar he called the anti-glycation protocol. This was the finding that surprised him most, and it will probably surprise you too. There's a process called glycation that happens in your body every time blood glucose rises above what your cells can immediately use. Excess glucose molecules attach themselves to proteins, any proteins, including the proteins that make up your optic nerve, your lens, and your retinal cells. Picture caramelization, the same chemical reaction that turns the surface of bread golden brown in a toaster, that deepens the color of onions in a hot pan. That process happens in slow motion inside your eyes every time blood sugar stays elevated for too long. The lens loses its clarity, the optic nerve loses its conductivity, the retina loses sensitivity. And this begins long before anyone receives a diabetes diagnosis, years before, sometimes decades. In Okinawa, a bitter melon called goya shows up in the diet multiple times a week. It's an acquired taste, genuinely unpleasant to most people at first. But the active compounds in it, zeaxanthin and polypeptide P, have been shown to improve insulin receptor sensitivity and reduce post-meal blood glucose spikes by up to 20%. If bitter melon isn't accessible, berberine and Ceylon cinnamon have documented similar mechanisms. The core principle is the same regardless of the source. Protecting your vision starts with managing blood sugar, not with eye drops. The third pillar he called the tissue repair combination, seaweed and turmeric. These 2 foods act on the eye from different angles, but they address the same root problem, chronic low-grade inflammation. Most people think of cataracts as just a natural part of getting old, but the mechanism behind lens clouding is specific and worth understanding. The lens is made up largely of proteins called crystallins. For vision to stay sharp, those proteins need to maintain a precise, ordered arrangement. Imagine tightly woven fibers in a rope. Chronic inflammation gradually disrupts that arrangement. It's like someone slowly pulling threads from the rope over years and decades, until the structure loses its form, and light can no longer pass through cleanly. The seaweeds common in Okinawa contain a compound called fucoidan that suppresses the primary molecular switch of ocular inflammation, boosts the production of antioxidant enzymes that protect the lens, and supports the integrity of the blood-retinal barrier, the protective layer that keeps circulating toxins out of the retinal tissue. Turmeric works as a partner to that. Curcumin, its active compound, is one of the few anti-inflammatory molecules that can actually cross the blood-retinal barrier, something most standard anti-inflammatories cannot do. Combined with piperine, the compound in black pepper, its absorption increases by roughly 2,000%. Spirulina and chlorella are widely available Western equivalents for the seaweed component. A teaspoon of turmeric with a pinch of black pepper added to food daily, simple, inexpensive, consistent. But the doctor realized that the 3 foods alone didn't fully explain what he was seeing. There was a behavioral thread connecting everything. In Okinawa, there's a principle called hara hachi bu. It means eat until you're 80% full. It sounds almost too simple to matter. But the physiological effect of that habit, practiced across a lifetime, is profound. Every time you eat past the point of need, particularly refined carbohydrates and sugars, excess glucose circulates in the blood, and as it circulates, it binds to proteins. That's glycation again. The same caramelization process triggered at the table 3 times a day, every day for decades. The elderly people of Okinawa weren't on restrictive diets. They weren't counting anything. They simply stopped eating before they felt completely full. And that single habit, repeated across a lifetime, translated into lower insulin spikes, less time with elevated blood glucose, and meaningfully less glycation damage accumulating in the tissues of the eye year after year. Before finishing, the doctor felt compelled to address something he saw constantly in his practice back home. Patients coming in with dry eyes, eye fatigue, difficulty with near vision, that gritty, uncomfortable feeling that never quite goes away. And their solution was always the same: lubricating drops from the pharmacy, a stronger pair of reading glasses off the rack, blue light-blocking lenses. These are bandages placed over a deeper wound. Lubricating drops address the surface of the eye. They do nothing for the capillaries feeding the retina. Reading glasses correct the image that reaches the brain. They don't slow the degradation happening inside the lens. It's the visual equivalent of replacing a cracked screen on a phone whose processor is failing. What actually matters is a dilated fundus exam, at least once a year after 50, macular pigment density measurement when available, and a glycated hemoglobin test to track chronic glycation, even in the absence of a formal diabetes diagnosis. Those 3 assessments together give a real picture of where ocular aging stands, long before symptoms appear. On his last evening in Okinawa, the doctor sat with Hatsue for a while before heading to the airport. She was sewing again, same window, same quiet focus, same steadiness in her hands. He told her that where he came from, doctors treated eyes, that here it seemed like people simply took care of them. She smiled, poured more tea, and went back to her work. The conclusion he carried home was not complicated. Losing your vision in old age is common, but common is not the same as inevitable. The distance between the two is measured in small, daily choices made over years, in what gets put on the plate, in when the fork gets set down, in whether the body gets what the eye actually needs to keep its structure intact. The retina doesn't fail all at once. It fades quietly, over time, through accumulated neglect, and it holds just as quietly through accumulated care. Starting with what you eat tomorrow.